Hey guys, Kate from Core Wellbeing, and excuse the training attire. I thought I'd just quickly get home and film this video because I've had quite a few people reach out wanting to know more about a gluten-free diet and what it entails, what you would be avoiding. So yeah, let's just jump straight into it. So firstly, gluten is a protein that's found in gluten-containing grains. So key ones are wheat, rye, spelt, barley, and it is actually in oats. Oats don't inherently contain gluten. They have a slightly different protein, but due to cross-contamination both in the processing and the growing, you'll actually find that there can be traces of gluten in oats. So unless they're specifically labeled as gluten-free, then you will find gluten in oats. Sorry, I feel like this is a funny angle here. Yeah, so they're what you want to avoid. And then outside of that, you will find gluten in heaps and heaps of different foods. So when you're eating anything from a packet, you really have to read ingredient labels, and that will be the best way to find out if it is gluten containing or if it's not. So the only other things, I guess, that would be containing gluten are derivatives of those grains. So fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, dairy, meat, fish, chicken, eggs, etc. They don't contain gluten. It's only those gluten-containing grains and then anything that's derived from that. So often it'll be like your thickeners, flavor enhancers. So you'll find it in a lot of sauces, processed, packaged foods, which we're actually wanting to move away from anyway. So having a gluten-free diet shouldn't be too much of an issue when we're also moving more towards a whole foods diet. So by pulling out gluten, you actually don't end up with any nutritional deficiencies. Those grains, while yes, there is some nutritional benefit, I feel that the detriment that they have to your health seriously outweighs the benefit that they provide. Yes, you get B vitamins. Yes, there's fiber. Yes, okay, people find them really appealing. They taste good. You know, yes, everybody loves bread and pizza and that kind of stuff. Maybe not everybody, but you don't lose any nutrients by cutting them out. So while a gluten-free diet, I know people kind of get up in arms about pulling out entire food groups, you can still have grains if you like. So things like rice. Rice is a fantastic gluten-free alternative. You can have buckwheat, you can have quinoa. You're not actually going to end up with gaps in your diet from a nutritional or a flavor point of view, in my opinion. So what would you replace it with? Definitely bread is a big one that people get concerned about, and there are so many gluten-free breads on the market. They're not all that healthy, I do have to say. Some gluten-free breads are probably more unhealthy than the gluten-containing breads in the sense that they are very highly refined, and often they'll add in other kind of thickeners or additives to give that bouncy sort of light texture to the bread. So always read ingredient labels. This is probably going to be the biggest adjustment. So if you're used to having your nice fluffy bread, or even if you're used to having like a sourdough bread or something that's kind of, in that health space, then gluten-free bread that's actually healthy for you is going to be a little bit of an adjustment. They're very dense because gluten does have that sort of sticky, gluey nature, which is what makes bread, soft and malleable and gives it, that nice bouncy texture. So when you're having a gluten-free bread, so something that's made with, say, buckwheat and rice flour, it is going to be a lot more dense. It doesn't have that bounce, but personally, I quite like it. I know maybe my palate's a little bit questionable at times, but I think once you can adjust to it, and you'll always toast it, I would recommend. You don't have to, but it is better from a texture point of view. It's gluten-free bread isn't horrible. It's just an adjustment, just like with anything else. Things might initially be a bit of a change. Change can be scary. Change is different, but once you feel the benefits to your health and your palate kind of adapts, I actually love the gluten-free breads that I have. The brands that I would personally recommend, so Naturis, which is quite readily available in health food stores, and you can get, they have a buckwheat, they have rice, they have corn. Personally, I quite like the buckwheat one, just because I do, but you can have any of those, they will be fine. Spring Wellness is another brand that does a sprouted bread. We're about to have my cat again. Yeah, so that's a sprouted bread with like quinoa, and they use, I know there's one you can get with like pumpkin and turmeric and different spices and that sort of thing. So it's going to be a lot more filling. It is a really dense loaf of bread. You probably only need one slice, whereas maybe you would previously have had two pieces of regular bread, but there's definitely alternatives out there. If you're in a cafe and the only gluten-free bread they have is the highly processed white fluffy stuff, then fine. Like, it's that 80-20 kind of rule really does apply. What you're doing 80% of the time, actually, except if you're celiac and except if you're in the initial stages of avoiding gluten. So 80-20 in the sense that you can have the good, healthy, gluten-free bread 80% of the time, so when you're at home, when you can control it. And then if 20% of the time you're out and about and you happen to have that, more highly refined gluten-free bread, then so be it. If you feel like you really don't want to do that and you're not celiac and you're outside of that initial stage of gluten avoidance, and you, in that 20% of the time, you want to have, your spelt sourdough, then that is entirely up to you. I always ask people to question, what's your highest value? So is it your health, or is it the enjoyment that you get from that meal and, that sourdough bread? Personally, for me, my health wins, but that doesn't have to be the same for you, and that is absolutely fine. All I want to achieve here is for people to know that there are options, to be informed about what gluten can be doing to your health, and then you have the opportunity to weigh it up, because until you have the knowledge, you kind of are just moving about making the same choices that you always have and not really knowing why. So yeah, I just want to fill in those gaps for you and help you to understand what the alternatives are and why you might want to perhaps lean that way. So outside of gluten-free bread, I guess we're actually really lucky that, because so many people do have issues with gluten these days, there really are so many alternatives, both in, a grocery setting when you're actually buying the different products, but also when you're out and about in cafes, restaurants. Most restaurants and cafes will be incredibly accommodating, and please don't feel afraid to ask for a gluten-free alternative. As I said in the previous video, we need to let go of that feeling of judgment, because ultimately, if you're making choices that are going to make your health better, and it can be in whatever sense, like if gluten is a drain on your energy, if gluten makes you feel bloated and uncomfortable, even if it's for half an hour, and if you don't want to experience that, then that is 100% your choice, and it's absolutely not something for anyone else to judge you about. So please let go of that, and please, as a society, let's be more understanding of people who do have these health issues, however big or small. And because the other thing is, to you or to me or to whoever, what we might perceive as something that's unimportant can be really debilitating and emotional, or just plain uncomfortable for someone. So yeah, we need to have a little bit more acceptance around that, and just to let it go and realize that what someone else is eating is their choice. It doesn't have any impact on us. So plenty of alternatives when you're out in cafes and restaurants. Really, if you start building your diet around protein and vegetables and a bit of fruit, that kind of stuff, you will be naturally eating gluten-free. It's only the other bits and pieces that you add on top of that. So sauces are the main ones where people really need to read ingredient labels. The other one would be milk alternatives. So if you're not having cow's milk and you have soy milk or almond milk or coconut milk, make sure you read the ingredient labels, because often they will add in other things to keep the texture, keep it emulsified and the texture smooth and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I would never say to someone, pull gluten out of your diet and then move towards gluten-free packaged foods. That obviously can be quite unhealthy. Just the label of gluten-free doesn't make a diet inherently good for you. And you will find that, again, because it is such a big thing in society these days, food manufacturers will use the term gluten-free and kind of try to trick us into equating it with health. So it's good that products will be labeled gluten-free, because but don't just take that as a sign that it is a health food, because you could easily have a gluten-free cake that has been packed full of sugar and could have colors and preservatives and all of that stuff. And yeah, maybe gluten-free, but it's still not going to be healthy. So we want to be gluten-free but whole foods. So the more you can prepare food at home, the better. The more you can buy just sort of fresh ingredients, the better. And the more savvy you can get with ingredient labels when you do have to buy packet foods, the better. So I would always say to someone, ignore the marketing claims, like take note that it's gluten-free. That obviously takes some of the detective work out for you. But then ignore the nutrition information panel. You don't need to worry about the carbs, the protein, the fats, unless you're specifically an athlete and you're training for something, or we've got you counting macronutrients for some reason, which I wouldn't do with many of my clients at all. We just want to dive straight to that ingredients list, so to see exactly what's in the food and make sure that everything that you're reading there is a whole food that you could potentially walk around the supermarket to somewhere else and pick it up and identify it as an ingredient. So if it says E351, personally, I don't think I could go and find that on a shelf somewhere, so we probably want to not be eating it. So yeah, gluten-free doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. It doesn't have to taste bad or any different. It's really just about getting, I guess, savvy, mainly with ingredient labels, and it's not even much of an effort once you start to play around with it. I'd say go through your pantry as a starting place and read through everything and find out where gluten is hiding for you at the moment. Because you might be thinking that you have a predominantly gluten-free diet, but if there's some like sauce or dressing or, maybe in your soy milk every single day there's traces of gluten, you could be unknowingly exposing yourself. And once you've restocked the pantry, it's really not too hard at all. So I hope that was helpful. If you would like gluten-free meal ideas, if there's something that I haven't covered, I think I've covered it all. So your gluten-free grains, I can't remember if I said this, but rice, totally fine, buckwheat, totally fine, quinoa, millet, all of those things are totally fine. You just want to avoid wheat, spelt, rye, barley, and oats unless they're labeled gluten-free. And there are some other sort of ancient grains as well, so kamut and triticale. I don't know if that's how you even pronounce it, but those kinds of things also contain gluten. Can't say I would see them around commonly, but yeah, get savvy with ingredient labels, let go of any judgment around it, do it for your health, do what feels right for you, and if you have any questions, send them my way. I'll chat to you guys soon.